Super Mario 64 is really cool, and I even know a few people who like it, I swear, I'm not making this up.
What am I, a monkey?
Mario 64 was directed by Mr. Video Games himself, this guy, Shigeru Miyamoto, and was his final proper official credit as a director, and no, Super Mario Run does not count. People often think of him more as the producer he's been for the last couple decades, and as the creator of Mario and Zelda, but before he stepped back, his track record as a director and designer is insane. Guy had a practically flawless record. Or video gameography. He's done some design work on games since Mario 64, but this was his last true foray as the creative head of a project, and it can't be overstated how important his involvement in the step for gaming as a whole was, because this guy just got it, and as the story goes, set the standard for 3D gaming. Not bad for the dude who also practically saved the entire industry less than a decade prior, having designed 2 games back to back that were both at their times considered to be the greatest games ever made. Think about that. He defined video games for both the second and third dimensions. Guy's an artistic mastermind. Point being, Miyamoto was at his peak here, and for those more musically inclined, I'll put it like this. Miyamoto was like the Led Zeppelin of game designers, and pretty much everyone else was Clay Aiken. Miyamoto's career up to this point, to put it conservatively, was already at legendary status, so let's just briefly see how he got there. In the mid-1970s, Miyamoto was hired by Nintendo through an interview his dad had gotten him with Nintendo president at the time, Hoshi Yamauchi. Miyamoto's toy creations impressed him, and he was brought on as an artist for arcade cabinets, which at the time Nintendo was only just starting to create, along with video games altogether. And by only the early 80s, Nintendo was on the verge of collapse, leading Yamauchi tasking Miyamoto with the responsibility to create a successful game to save the company, because he happened to be standing there. Miyamoto directed the project through pitching and illustrating concepts to the programmers, who then did their best to implement his ideas. And according to Gunpei Yokoi, Miyamoto's full concept for the game was just too complex for what they could feasibly achieve. But they still made it out alright. The game saved Nintendo and launched Miyamoto's career, leading him to develop several sequels and new franchises. So I guess technically the Super Mario series is a spin-off of the Donkey Kong franchise? Huh, man descending from ape. Then a few years later on the Famicom, Miyamoto made Kung Fu Master... Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers 2, both of them. Legend of Zelda, Mario 3... Yeah, he kind of went insane here. There was no reason for him to go this hard. Just kidding, yes there was, it was his job. After this branch of his career and into the 90s, Miyamoto did some occasional design work, but mostly stuck to the producer's chair, even his own series being handed off to other artists by now. And at this point he was already being revered as the grandfather of video games, and his influence could be seen everywhere. With the success of the SNES, Miyamoto, now an executive at the company, was living the high life. Now by 1994, Nintendo is now gearing up for the Nintendo 64, so now the question was, well, what's our first 3D game going to be? Several companies around the time had attempted and continually fumbled video games in a 3D world, with FPSs being pretty much the only ones working regularly. They really needed to stick this landing to convince the average gamer at the time that 3D was worth the investment, so they couldn't drop the ball here. So the person to direct the title was obvious. Miyamoto really had to be the one to do this in the industry, as his design prowess and legacy even then already preceded him, and now it was time for him to jump into the third dimension along with Mario. The team's top priority was Mario's movement.
Unlike traditional Mario games where you had a kind of a linear A to Z type of game where you play a level, beat a boss, play a level, beat a boss, by slightly pressing up on the control stick, Mario will begin to tiptoe. By pressing up further, he'll begin to creep. Still further, he'll walk, then jog, then sprint. This will also give you 360-degree control. Anyway, I think we'd love to play Mario for the rest of the day, but we all have to move on, so we'll show you a couple other games.
Cool. Because things were now complicated. Prior to Mario 64, pretty much all 3D games had tank controls, and I hate tank controls. And then, whoa! Wow, it's like I'm controlling an actual character and not having my senses trained to desensitize me to the feeling of pulling the trigger. It was important for the game to not only be well designed, but fun to play. With how long 3D games would take to develop, the games likewise would need to last longer so more development time was acceptable. Couldn't allow you to beat a game in 5 minutes anymore. Even 5 hours would be on the short end. Point being, making Mario fun to move around as would also extend the game's lifespan by drawing players into coming back to it again just to keep experiencing the fluid control. And Miyamoto got it. It's so fun, man. Fun to the point you realize you just wasted the last 20 minutes doing nothing but just messing around the castle for the 8th time. The controls are fluid to the point that people go absolutely insane when playing it, doing far more with the movement than was ever expected of them, and lets the game continue to be massively enjoyable despite its incredibly dated graphics. It controls fantastic, but I think an element that's oftentimes glossed over due to how used to it we are within games like this now is its structure. Miyamoto recognized a lot of changes would have to be made to make Mario, the concept, work in 3D. No more simple left to right anymore, ladies and gentlemen. This is the third dimension, except for games that didn't feel like it. He really challenged himself with this project, and it resulted in something completely new and unique. Really unique. To the point that they're not even really the same thing anymore. Here's a question. What is Mario? A miserable pile of secrets? Perhaps, but that's for another time. Prior to 64, Mario was a series of games in third person with an emphasis on running and jumping to clear stages designed in a horizontal layout, with the exception of not Mario 2. And you saw this get slightly expanded upon over time, with things like vertical levels, more types of power-ups, and secret exits, but those three things were kept consistent, primarily that focus on movement. While other platformers of the time had elements of Mario in their design, most of them had a large emphasis on combat, the conflict, while Mario is focused on getting from one side to the other, almost like being brought on a tour of its world, yet with a de-emphasis on exploration, something that set games like Sonic apart from it later on. So then the question was, how do you take that simplicity and give it a Z-axis? You can't have simple left to right in a truly 3D game, so the first thing to change was the level layouts. Miyamoto understood you couldn't just put a big flagpole at the end of every level, so instead he turned the levels into mission zones, with several objectives to complete in each one, which was also a choice made with the understanding that they didn't have the time to design 32 plus levels like in Mario 1. He originally wanted to include 40 levels in the game. They ended up making 15, and damn, maybe that was a good thing. I love this game, but can you imagine there being 320 stars? Anyway, these worlds were designed in such a way that allow each mission to be played in any number of ways, and effectively end up making 120 levels because of this, and demonstrates the potential the Mario series actually does have for including exploration. Worlds like this were the natural next step. Jump? For Mario, as their shapes and sizes kept the focus on Mario's movement, which was truly the core of the series all along. And on top of this, most objectives in the game allow the player to change course for another one at any time. In adapting the platforming genre to 3D, Miyamoto inadvertently also created the modern open world game. Its influence in this regard cannot be overstated. Mario 64 is vastly more influential to games like Tears of the Kingdom than even Ocarina of Time is. Continuing down this open world line of thinking, there are a total of 120 stars available in the game. Of these 120, only 70 are required to finish it. The decision to only make 70 stars required, 58%, actually makes the game drastically better, and is one of the best design choices ever made in a video game. Think about it. If all 120 stars were needed to climb up the endless stairs, it'd be like, can't get this one? Well, that's it for you then. I know tons of people are probably yelling skill issue at their screen right now, so to remind you, this was many people's first 3D game ever, and likewise was alienating to a lot of players. By only requiring 70, that lets players decide, this is too difficult for me, or this isn't all that fun, let me do something else, 50 times, and is even furthered by a few stars the game gives you for free, though the actual quality of those stars is another discussion. But anyway, since this was considered the first true major 3D platformer, it was designed to be more forgiving in this regard, and over time, higher demands for the player's 3D platforming skills were more reasonable to be demanded, as seen in other games down the road. All these choices feed into the central idea of freedom, to play how you want to. The game's not going to tell you what to do. Skip the stuff you don't want to, and get to where you do want to go how you want to. There's really only two things I can think of that make the game any better. The first is that they didn't kick you out of a world every time you got a star. It'd be nice to be able to get one, then just immediately be able to go on to another, and just exit via the exit course option in the pause menu. I get that this is done since, 1, some stars leave you in a position where it's impossible to go anywhere else, and 2, many stars slightly change the layout of the worlds, but I wish it'd just reload the level if that were the case, like teleport you back to the start of the course without having to jump back into the world again. The second is that I wish all of the levels were open from the start of the game, and the star door requirements were only for the Bowser levels. I get that the levels rake up in difficulty over time, but there's no reason why someone shouldn't be allowed to go to, say, Hazy Maze Cave first. The game's already open to the point and designed around not going in order anyway. This is why I consider Odyssey to be the true Mario 64 too. Mario 65? 128? It's the only 3D Mario game since 64 that actually continues to build on its structure, with things like much larger worlds that let you stay in for as many missions as you want, adding checkpoints to make movement in them much easier, and a massive amount of choice given to what objectives the player chooses to seek out. Most of the time. Many gamers, and even Nintendo, tend to lump Sunshine and the Galaxy games in with these two, and I just don't get it. The others have similar structures to them, but they are not the same. Sunshine is probably the best feeling movement of the entire series, but its levels are much more restrictive in how you can go about completing them, with very little room for going out of order and requiring you to do the first 7 missions of each world, where 64 lets you skip entire levels with no penalty. And the Galaxy games have even stricter layouts and movement. It does give you more choice in stars you get though. None of these are bad games, I love them all, they're just not in these game spheres, you know? Last year I was replaying 64. I got to about 118 stars and then just stopped. It's still not done, I just don't feel like finishing it. And so the file sat since. I wondered why. I've gotten all 120 stars tens of times before. Why all of a sudden do I not want to? Who stops at 118 stars in Mario 64? Then it became crystal clear to me. It was because the last star I had to do before the one in the final Bowser level was the 100 coins in Tick-Tock Clock. Not a terribly difficult star, but absolutely not a fun one. And that was it. It wasn't fun. I died a couple times while trying it and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. So why did I let this one star stop me from finishing the game in general? I could have easily just fought Bowser and not done it, but I felt compelled to. That only doing the bare minimum 70 is filthy casual behavior. Then it became so obvious to me. Why am I letting nerds on the internet corrupt my enjoyment of a game I love? So I stopped. Yeah, that's simple. I replayed the game from start recently and did so with my only commitment being to do as many stars until there weren't any left I wanted to do. Any one that seemed not fun to play, or too boring or frustrating to complete, I skipped. I like challenge, but there's a difference between missions that are challenging and just tedious and not fun. And let me tell you, after playing it this way, I have to say, this game was never meant to be 100% completed. It's even downplayed by the game itself. It doesn't lead to much and is mostly just stuff to sort of let you mess around. The biggest thing is honestly the little bit of extra text it triggers from Bowser. Yeah, the cannon and seeing Yoshi are cool, but again, neither are a huge deal. And the 100 lives are, again, just so you can go screw around in levels with even less of a consequence than getting a game over already has. The enhanced triple jump is probably the biggest reward, but again, really doesn't do anything. And with this, it becomes so obvious why Miyamoto laid it out this way, the 70-star minimum, to maximize players' enjoyment. To let them make that choice, which ones were worth playing to them. Not only did playing it this way make the experience much more enjoyable, but it also made me realize forcing myself to go for all 120 out of nothing other than for the sake of doing it was in many ways actively making me enjoy the game less, and completely going against the philosophy Miyamoto designed the game with. Freedom.
The way the game is structured, it's actually all focused around this castle. You'll be doing levels that are hidden within the castle, underneath the castle, up in the castle, up in the sky, etc., etc.
Something to mention though is that I ended up completing the game with 83 stars, not 70, because I played all the missions I could think of that sounded fun to play, and weren't locked behind completing other missions. Also, doing this completely Rainbow Ride pilled me. Yeah, this level rocks, and I was wrong for not liking it before. I had a similar feeling when I finished getting the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild. I was so infatuated with the game at my height playing it, and just did whatever I could possibly think of to prolong having things to do in it. But really, I was making busy work for myself, and by the end of it, I didn't feel accomplished. I asked myself, well, was it worth it? For this? For bragging rights, yes, 64's other 50 stars are not nearly as monotonous as solving the same 6 puzzles 900 times, but that's not really my point. It's that I was once again making something I enjoyed actively less enjoyable for myself. I used to tell myself things like, all these things are in the game, therefore you must be intended to collect them all, but that's not the case. There's 900 of these things, so you never have to get the same ones over again. Same for the shrines, which are honestly a bit more of a direct comparison to the stars. Giving the player a variety of objectives, and especially when giving them the option to fully skip some, is a decision meant to feed your freedom. If you enjoy completing every single task, by all means go ahead, but to the same extent, don't strain your relationship with something you like, because that feeling of witnessing your enjoyment for something you love actively disappearing, it's a scary thing. Realizing you're not enjoying a game, that'll put you in a mood. Makes you not want to do anything. Makes you think, why do I even exist? Any other game you weren't enjoying, you'd just turn off. Why are you continuing your frustration for no reason? Here's my remedy for stuff like this. Stop doing the 100 coins a TikTok clock. Better yet, take a break. Take a vacation. Pop in another game and relax for a bit. Take some time. Do some soul searching. Maybe even stop playing games for a bit. Read a book or watch a movie. Stop making yourself hate one of the few things you enjoy. What I'm trying to say is, value your time and stop putting yourself through something you know you're not enjoying to no real end. And if you do enjoy all 120 stars in Mario 64, that's completely fine. And in fact, I'm happy for you. And also, there's nothing wrong with finding Hazy Maze Cave not fun, or catching that rabbit. The game was designed around it, and makes how the player feels about things into an avenue for every playthrough to be different from the last, giving the player more options to complement the more possibilities 3D allows. Enjoy the game, you dingus!